Hi, Jessica.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Good.
Let me introduce us. Um, this is meaningoflife.tv. I am Philip Menchaca, project coordinator at Union Theological Seminary, and I am speaking with Jessica Sherry. You are a documentary filmmaker, and you are making your directorial debut, is that right, with Waiting for John?
Yes, it's true. I worked a bit in television documentary production before this, but this is my first feature film as a director. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I saw it a few days ago. It's really very interesting. It's what we're going to talk about today. For this documentary, you went to a South Pacific island called Tanna, and filmed what is the last cargo cult. So just to jump right into it, what is a cargo cult?
Yeah, it's such a kind of crazy concept, actually. Tanna is an island, as you mentioned, sort of in the remote South Pacific. And basically, during World War II, the US built a bunch of bases in the South Pacific to sort of fight Japan. And they brought with them all sorts of, things that you would bring if you're building a military base. So refrigerators and canned food and airplanes and trucks. And the indigenous population of this kind of small South Pacific island hadn't seen this sort of influx of goods before. They'd never seen, canned food or refrigerators. So they thought that the Americans must have sort of a spiritual connection, that it must somehow be coming from the gods in some way. A cargo cult is, I guess, when kind of these indigenous cultures are exposed to sort of these Western or technologically advanced goods, and because kind of the jump in technology is so great, they can't find the explanation for them in their sort of worldview. So they kind of attribute them to the spiritual world. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about the John Frum movement, the cargo cult that I looked
Yeah,
at.
this is the one that's still going on because cargo cult, I guess, as I understand it, is a fairly loose term or broad term. It's even in popular parlance now become a pejorative term in some senses. Is when you want to denigrate someone else's um,
Yeah, it's some
beliefs.
kind
Cargo cult. It's
of
going to
cargo
jump.
science. Yeah,
Yeah,
cargo
cargo
cult
cult science.
science.
Yeah.
That's kind of a popular term that came about for it. Using cargo cult, and it's because it's like you attributed the wrong explanation to what happened. Kind of like the people of Tanna thought,
Mm-hmm.
oh, canned food must come from the gods because it just gets dropped by airplanes that we can't have no explanation for. It's the same thing in science where it's like, oh, I think it's caused by this, but it's actually
It's
not.
not
So it's
right.
definitely a negative thing that way. Yeah.
But the John Frum movement, which is this particular uh, um, religion, you can call it a religion, absolutely, that you studied. What is it exactly?
Yeah. So after this, this event happened, the people of Tanna kind of they saw the U.S. sort of marching around and raising the American flag, and they thought, well, maybe that's how they get these goods. So the people of the John Frum movement started marching around like U.S. soldiers and raising the American flag, and sort of the hope that this cargo would come to them. And that was sort of back in the 40s, and kind of the religion. I do call it a religion because it is sort of a religious movement, a
Mm-hmm.
belief system, evolved from there. And yeah, and they still do practice sort of those rituals today, where they march around like soldiers and raise the American flag every day, in kind of representing their respect and their connection with America. And the reason it's called the John Frum movement is that John Frum was their original prophet. So John Frum was kind of the figure who predicted that the Americans would come, or he at least predicted that good things would rain down upon the people of Tanna. Who exactly John Frum was, and that's all up for debate. But yeah.
So, can you give a? So you say they do these marches and they raise the American flag. Are there any other kinds of rituals that they have that are associated with these beliefs?
Yeah. So every day they raise the flag, and they have one celebratory day that's February 15th, which is the first day that they raise the flag, and so that's
The
kind
first
of their,
day ever?
the first day ever in 1956. Yeah, the first day ever, and that's kind of their biggest holiday, John Frum Day, and also sort of kind of like people go to church on Sunday, they have sort of a Friday night ceremony, which is one of my favorite things about the John Frum movement, is that all the people in the village, they get together kind of in the town square, and they have guitars and they sing from sunset to sunrise, and so some of the people go to sleep, some of the women, children, people get tired, but they really try to make it through the whole night, and they're very kind of songs about their history and about the belief, and just kind of soothing songs. And it is kind of, 4 a.m. It is a little bit of a religious experience, I'd say.
Yeah, I imagine it has to take some endurance to get through that all-night singing session. Are these songs that they compose themselves about, or have they are there any Western songs that they use, or?
Yeah, they have composed them all themselves, and they are sort of all, passed down from generation to generation. I imagine a lot, like church songs, or the songs that we all know from our, childhood and history. They kind of get passed down like that. They do have a distinct sound, but they are played on kind of, acoustic guitars. So there is. Yeah, I guess there is a sort of a Western vibe to it also, but you really have to listen to some songs from the John Frum movement.
Yeah, there's some of it in the film, and it's like I said at the outset, it's a really interesting film. So we'll link to that website where people can visit and learn a little bit more about the work. Now there was an interesting note here about John Frum, who is this prophet. One of the people featured in the film, Chief Isaac, who is the leader of this John Frum movement. I believe it was him, who said that John Frum first came to them in 1940, which was before Americans arrived on Tanna. So can you talk a little bit about that story he told, and then we can kind of move into exactly what that might mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to kind of go back a little bit, because I think to understand, who John Frum might have been, or why he appeared in 1940, you'd have to kind of go back a little bit to what was going on at the time. And so, sort of throughout the early 1900s, Tanna it's a small island in the South Pacific, and it was colonized. And it was colonized by the English and the French, and there was a very large sort of missionary presence there. Because of this new government, there were a lot of new laws that repressed the indigenous people and sort of their practices and sort of traditions that they had for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. So with sort of this influx and this of new foreign power and this repression, I think that people were really, they were struggling. They were looking for a way to sort of, reclaim their identity and their land and their belief, to sort of come together in some way. So in the 1930s, it got really bad. They actually made real laws, against people not going to church and against people practicing some of their, their traditions. So that's right around, and 1940 is when Chief Isaac says that John Frum appeared. There's stories, as early as maybe 1938. It's hard to exactly pinpoint when he came about. But he came about as this sort of idea, prophet. So they say he came as a man first. There's a lot of theories, I guess, about what what his appearance was like. So it's either he was like John from America, so maybe he was a scout in 1940 who came from the military to check out the islands and look for bases, and some people came upon him and he said, "Oh, America's coming," and so that's how that sort of myth got started. John Frum came and said good things are gonna come and we'll be protected by America. But there's also there's that idea, but I almost favor the idea that there were these strong leaders looking for a way to bring the people together, and visions were popular in Tanna culture. So they had visions of a prophet, maybe, and named him John Frum and kind of said, John Frum wants us to come together and good things will happen. So whether he was a man who actually came, whether he was a spiritual force, whatever happened, the leaders of the movement, which were some of Chief Isaac, the chief now, his grandfather, I guess, and father, they said, okay, like let's all get together behind this force and reclaim our identity. Let's go back to our traditional customs and just believe that good things will happen in the future. So whether at the outset in 1940 they predicted America would come, or whether when America came, they said, "Oh, of course, John Frum was American. That's how this happened." I am not the one to say. I don't know, and I don't know. I don't think it matters. It's just the way sort of religion evolves itself. But so once America came, it kind of proved John Frum's existence legitimate and really cemented the belief because it was so miraculous that they had all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, during colonial rule, it seemed that there was real a lashback against the John Frum movement. So at one point in the film, I think some people said they even went to prison. Is that correct? The colonial powers put various leaders of this movement in prison. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was crazy actually. The colonial powers, they did not want the people of these islands to band together and gain strength. And so as soon as this figure of John Frum was doing it, they immediately arrested the top members of the movement, and one of them was Chief Isaac's grandfather, and he spent 17 years in prison. So from 1940, I think, to 1956, maybe. Somewhere in there, 16, 17 years. It was just their way of kind of clamping down on the population. Mm-hmm. But it didn't work, and I think that that's true of a lot of religions, where the more you try to hold them down and repress them, the more people kind of band together and say, this is giving us strength. Look at, and now we have a martyr to prove it. Now we have someone who's suffering for the belief. So they kind of, it had the opposite effect actually. They should have ignored the John Frum movement if they really wanted to let it kind of fizzle out.
Yeah, there's kind of relatedly, there's some various psychological research that shows that when you attack someone's beliefs, what they tend to do is they double down on them, and so that makes sense that by even increasing the oppression on this group, they gave it even more staying power. Now, did they see the John Frum movement as protecting their traditional practices and beliefs in some way, that it's responsible for keeping them alive?
Yes, and it's a very weird contradiction that I myself sometimes don't understand how this sort of belief, this cargo cult belief, and this worship of America and raising the American flag protects the people of Tanna's indigenous, their traditional culture, and how do those things, coexist together in this one belief? But I guess I've come to terms with it in this idea that the John Frum movement was their own way of sort of reasserting their identity. They created a religion that was totally their own. It was something that they came up with and that helped them resist the powers that were repressing them. So So in a way, this new belief that's, I guess crazy at first glance, it really did bring them back to their roots, I think. So yeah, they do believe even today that by being part of the John Frum movement, they're also preserving their traditional culture, and America is helping them, protecting them to do that in some way.
So how much of the appeal of this religion, I'm asking you to kind of get into their heads, it might be a little bit difficult to answer, but how much of the appeal do you think comes from a belief that it will bring, that these practices, by raising the flag, by demonstrating their connection and relationship to the U.S., will bring them cargo, and how much do you think, versus that it practices that bind them together as a community? Like, is it really about the cargo, or do you think it's really more about the way it binds them together and connects them to their ritual, their traditions?
Yeah, I think from the very beginning, it, like we just talked about, it was a way to kind of assert their identity and kind of come together as a community against outside forces. But I do think that somewhere in the 1960s, they did believe that by practicing these traditions that they would get a refrigerator, that they would get, canned food. I think that there was a period of time before before the people really understood what else was out there in the world, that, yeah, they're looking for material goods. But since that point, a lot has changed for them also. They have cell phones now. It's still a very small, so the village that still believes in John Frum movement, so about 250 people, still doesn't have electricity, but it has a lot more exposure to the outside world. Everything's more interconnected now, and they know where cargo comes from. They understand that there are manufacturing plants and factories and planes and things like that. And although they might not have a grasp of all the technology behind all of that, they know it's not totally the gods. So the belief, I think it's evolved. It isn't anymore just to get a refrigerator. It's become a little bit more vague to kind of deal with the times. So Chief Isaac won't say anymore that, we want cargo or we want, material goods. It's more about this undefined, America's going to come back and help us, or, we're connected with America in some way. And by practicing these rituals, good things will come to us. It's not as defined. And I think that naturally happens as the world changes. Religions also have to keep up and sort of say, oh, what they meant by that is, actually that America's going to come back and, help us in some way. So
when they learned about manufacturing and, they started getting cell phones and then that kind of thing, did that undermine the John Frum movement? Was there people that left because all of a sudden they realized, oh, it's not going to bring cargo from the gods? And I do think that there were some people who because the religion was so big even up until the 90s, it really was a popular thing to believe, and then as you saw in the film, it split. There was a split in the religion, which this is very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that even in this 100-year-old, less than 100-year-old religion on this little island, that you still see it kind of go through the steps that a lot of the mainstream religions have gone through. It's kind of that split and sort of having different beliefs. But I do think that there was some feeling that, oh, we're never going to get this stuff. This isn't helping, and some people left. But I think that it's just kind of a natural give and take, kind of the popularity of the religion or the belief system or not, and who's gaining power and what influences are there. And maybe people just had a little bit less of a need for it too. So that's why they moved away from it, which I think also happens maybe more generally with religions. But it has gotten a lot smaller, and it's so small now that there is a lot of talk that maybe the John Frum movement won't survive into the next generation because people will say, why are we worshiping America anyway? This is silly.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that split that we saw in the movie? and what happened there?
Yeah, so it's this when I had originally read about it, I thought, oh my goodness, this is kind of a impossible thing, a crazy thing. But basically, there was a lake near their main village, and a man came named Fred, and he said the lake is going to run out and flood the village, and it's going to become totally dry. And this had never happened in all the time that Tanna existed, and it did. The lake flooded over and drained and washed out the village, and so everyone thought he was a prophet. And I mean, I have to say, in kind of a side note, to editorialize the movie a little bit, meeting Fred, he did have sort of all the qualities you would imagine of a prophet. He was, he had just a force of, of personality and just kind of a mystical way about him that I can understand why he was able to kind of pull off pull off an idea like that, and then have people follow him afterwards. He seemed, kind of to be that sort of figure. So that happened in the John Frum movement village. The village split. It didn't even split. It actually, most of the people, almost all of the people followed Fred and pushed Chief Isaac, who's now the chief of the movement, pushed them out into their own kind of outcast village. So it was a very painful moment, and the believers really had to take stock and say, do I really believe in this? Am I going to leave my home and go with Chief Isaac and continue the belief? And Fred's movement is a little bit weird because it kind of combines some elements of Christianity, some elements of the John Frum movement, and they call it unity. So he kind of took little elements and said, look, you can believe anything, anything. I think it was his force of personality that really made it work.
That's very interesting. Because there's multiple villages on this island, and they aren't, and only Lacamara is made up of people who follow the John Frum movement. How do members of the Christian church who are on the island view the John Frum movement?
Yeah, they don't like the John Frum movement.
This is not surprising, but
exactly. I think historically, kind of it was the John Frum movement, as I mentioned, was directly opposed to the Christian missionaries.
Right.
So it came out of the repression that they felt. They were, the oppression that the Christian missionaries were originally kind of causing. So today there's still that division where there are still actually a lot of missionaries who are on even Tanna Island. And I have to say also that sometimes they're doing really good things. They're building schools and educating the population and providing healthcare and doing things that are really helpful for the people to survive. But also they are kind of always pushing the belief in their own way, and definitely believe the John Frum people are on the wrong path and try whatever means necessary to convince them of that, to follow the Bible. So that's an interesting dynamic. It was an interesting thing to film.
Yeah. Did you, well, actually one correction. I think I said the name of the village wrong. It's Lacamara, is that correct?
Lacamara, yeah.
Okay.
That's right. I think I said it wrong for the first 6 months I was there, so I think I don't mind one interview, but yeah, Lacamara.
Lacamara, okay. So I was going to ask, did you may not have gotten a sense of this, but so the John Frum movement, they've been waiting for John Frum to return, this prophet to return, and they're waiting. Did any of the Christians on the island see parallels between John Frum, people waiting for John Frum to return, and they themselves waiting for Jesus Christ to return? And did they see any tension there between, or if they're denigrating people for believing that John Frum is going to come back? Like, how does that reflect on their belief that Jesus is going to come back? Did you get a sense of how people in the Christian church dealt with that?
Yeah, I mean, to open it up a little wider, I think some of my goal with making this film, some of my real desire to tell this story was that this is a religion that seems so crazy from the outside. Like it seems like you're marching around like a U.S. soldier and you're hoping for a refrigerator. That's crazy. But if you put up, if you get to know the people and hear their story from their perspective and their history, and then also put up some of their words, their beliefs right up next to some of the things that are more accepted in the mainstream religion, the wider society, like Jesus coming back, or there's I think there's a lot of things in religions that just don't make 100% sense, but it's faith, so it doesn't have to. It's kind of okay. But it was important to me to put all the beliefs together and kind of feel the similarities between Jesus coming back and John Frum coming back. What makes someone else's belief any crazier than your own, so I mean, and to respond to your question, sort of, do the people, the Christian people on the island recognize that their belief is, has similarities to the John Frum movement? I think it's very hard when you do have faith kind of in your own way to recognize that anyone else's faith could possibly make any sense because you really believe in what you believe in. And religion's interesting like that because it builds such community and identity, but it's naturally also divisive against other communities who have also built their own identities. You kind of want people to believe this is correct and this is right and we're together in this, and so everyone else is outside and not with us. So I think that it's so hard to see the similarities when that's sort of the premise that you're working with. One thing I will say is when I ask people directly that question, because I did ask some people, a lot of the people who recently converted to Christianity told me that they believed in Christianity because it was written down, because there was a Bible that said the words, and their own religions haven't been written down. It's all been oral tradition. So you can see, like they would say, you can see the story and you can prove that it's true from however long ago. And I think that's an interesting argument because I feel like the interpretations of the Bible or interpretations of religion generally change so much and evolve so much, in decade to decade, that I think it was a funny thing for me to hear, but I think that was that would convince some people.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think you're kind of getting to this a little bit, but let me just ask you directly. I mean, I think some people are likely to look at this story and interpret it as evidence that all religions are false. And what would your reaction to that argument be?
Well, false is an interesting word to use.
Yeah.
I think religions. I think that there are a lot of things about religions. They're basically trying to explain the unexplainable a lot of the time. So for the John Frum movement and for cargo cults, they were trying to explain why these goods came, and there can't possibly be an explanation for it. And for other more mainstream religions, you're trying to explain things like the creation of the world, or what happens after death, and things that we don't have the answer to. And so a lot of religions have kind of taken those questions on. So are their answers, false or delusional, or, I mean, who am I to say? There's no way to know. They are, man-made, and everyone's just trying to answer these questions that they don't have the answers to. So in that way, I think it's kind of just genuine attempts to explain the world, with whatever means they can kind of come up with.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too that came through in the film was how it gave, even beyond just explanatory function, it gave people in this community a sense of purpose and hope that John Frum would come back, or that America would come and help them. So there's that aspect of religion too is just psychologically beneficial. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I would even elaborate on that. I do think, in cargo cults, it seems very direct, like they're hoping for a material good. But I think a lot of religion is based on the idea of hope, and asking for things that you can't attain yourself, that you don't, that you don't have a method to, a practical method to get. So, so you pray for them, you ask for, in a way that in the only way that you can. So I think, in some ways the John Frum movement people, they were hoping for a better life in some way. They were hoping for, good things to happen in their future, and maybe it would take the form, of refrigerators, which were, an important thing, a crazy thing if you're living, day to day off your garden. You can imagine how refrigerator would be.
I'm quite grateful for my refrigerator.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really incredible that they don't have that there. But yeah, I guess it's just a way, I think for people everywhere to ask for things that they don't know how to get in any other way. I mean, religion provides that.
Yeah. So what is life like in this village? You've said they've obviously gotten certain benefits of technological innovation at this point, but is it still quite harsh living conditions, or what is it like there?
Yeah, it is, as I mentioned before, kind of sustainable agriculture. So, and I didn't really understand what that meant when I first got there. I understood like, oh yeah, farming, that's interesting. But when you're really depending on what you can grow for what you're going to eat, what your family's going to eat that day, it's a tremendous amount of work. So every day the families are really tending to their gardens, which are usually quite a walk away. And they're looking at their next meals, they're really looking to their next meals. So, they raise a lot of pigs. Pigs are a big commodity. They're slaughtered for celebrations and things like that, and everyone's very proud of how many pigs they have. And the community, it's very warm. Pacific Island culture is a very warm culture. So there's a lot of celebration, a lot of laughing, a lot of hard work, a lot of children running around. They're definitely big families still. So more people can work, I think. But I guess what I learned is that it is hard work, but and it is a different pace of life. Things are, you're not bombarded by a million different images every day. And so I think that people are more vulnerable to sort of disease and and weather, and if things go wrong, it is more painful, for their communities. But overall, it is also a very happy, loving existence. It's not that they're, I know in some countries in the world they're really starvation is really prevalent diseases. They're okay in Vanuatu and Tanna. They're living their lives, and kind of, you can see Chief Isaac, he's 70 something now, and they make it work, and kind of just in a different way than we think of life. So there is no electricity. There's nothing. There's not a lot of modern comforts. But it was an interesting experience for me anyway.
Yeah.
We appreciate everything a little bit more.
Have you been back to the island since you made the film?
No, I haven't. I went back 2 times during production. The first time I spent 3 months there, and then the second time I spent a month there, actually. And during my second trip, I was able to show some of the people some of the images from the film, which is really fun. And they were really happy to see kind of the story told, and also to see sort of images of their grandparents and the archival footage of Tanna. They were really thought that was amazing. But I haven't been back since 2013. But I hope soon. It's so far away from where I am now.
Yeah.
So I have to be able to, get the time to go back and see everyone. Yeah. I think they're doing okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. The film is Waiting for John. It's a beautiful film. Speaking of pigs, there's some very good shots of cute piglets in this film. If anyone likes that, I recommend it. Thank you very much, and maybe we can talk again sometime.
Yeah, thank you so much, Philip. This has been really interesting.
All right.
Bye.